line in some time now, so I'm really excited to have him on, and we're going to be discussing the economy, precious metals, 2018, maybe some artificial intelligence, and we'll see where the conversation goes from there. But I have Jim Willie on the line, editor of the Hat Trick Letter, found at goldenjackass.com. Jim, thanks for coming on with me today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Here we are in the new year, and I'm expecting some very interesting developments in continuation of what has been set up last year.
Well, last year was rather a depressing year for precious metals. And you know what? I know that's probably a stretch, especially if you consider that it wasn't that big of a problem or whatever you would have. But it just seemed like gold was going back into this bear market, and given what we've seen so far in 2018, gold is getting strong again. It's solidly over $1,300, $1,331 as we do this call right now. So I'd like to get your thoughts on precious metals.
Well, that's a rather open question. Could you make it a little bit more specific?
Well, are you optimistic? What do you think?
For 2 days on precious metals, that's not a very specific question.
Well, let's talk then about what you think this $1,331 means. Is it significant to you that gold is steadily moving higher?
Well, to begin with, I don't pay a great deal of attention to the COMEX price. So you're mentioning a COMEX phenomenon that has seen the corrupt price go up $50 to $80, which is always nice, but it's based on price rigging and paper gold contracts, which I don't give a rat's ass about.
Okay. Well, is there any significance to the fact that it is going up in the face of this rigging, in the face of what is seemingly a strong Trump economy?
Anyone who thinks we have a strong American economy in the United States is somewhere between delusional and a moron. So when you see the gold price, the official corrupt gold price going up, I believe it's a reaction to a couple of things. First, the Treasury bonds are being dumped by foreign entities, and second, Wall Street is making a very high priority mission in lifting the rigged crude oil price. So what you're seeing is gold going up with the crude oil price. Both are now corrupted. One of the most recent events of interest with respect to the Federal Reserve in the last few months is that they added crude oil in addition to the stock market to their list of assets they consider critical, which means they intend to rig those prices. So, okay, oil's going up, gold's going up, stock's going up, and treasury bonds are being dumped, and a very, very strange phenomenon is going on. The dollar swap cost is going up. Foreign entities, foreign governments, foreign financial firms are putting in a rather strong bid for borrowed dollars via the swap. It's not from economic strength. It's from breakdown of financial instruments. Breakdown of, say, the multi-trillion-dollar foundation in derivatives for the petrodollar. We have banking systems in Europe that are collapsing, like in Spain, like in Greece, like in Italy, especially Italy. So with the dollar swap facility being drawn upon with very heavy demand, we're actually seeing the dollar drop in the dollar index, which means the euro's rising. The fiat currencies are a zero-sum game. There's no gold component in the dollar index. It's all paper I call them toilet paper currencies. So a 58% weight for the euro on the dollar index means that when the dollar is going down, the euro is going up. All right, so we have the dollar going down, treasuries being dumped, dollar swap facility under intense pressure globally, and gold is rising from the corrupt COMEX arena. Okay, fine. I care much more about what's going on with the non-dollar platforms. The Chinese interbank payment system, CIPS, competing with SWIFT. I care about the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is putting the IMF out to pasture as irrelevant. I care about the Belt and Road Initiative, which is the largest, most significant, grandest table and conference of infrastructure projects, perhaps in the history of mankind, that the United States is not participating in. I care about those, and I think the development and maturation, just adoption and usage and increased volume and more critical mass from these non-dollar platforms, that could be the biggest reason why gold is rising. But we have some extraordinary events that happened last year. The Basel Switzerland Bank for International Settlement, which is pretty much the fascist banker headquarters globally. They purport to be the central bank. They make the Basel banking regulations, like Basel I, Basel II. Who gave them authority? Not us, but they are the fascists, the ex-Nazis, who plied their trade in World War II and stole central banks, and now they feel as though they're the overlord of central banks across the Western world. Oh, that's all fine, but at least we should recognize them for who they are. They actually told the Western financial community last year that they're not going to supply more gold to the London market. The Vatican then was asked, well, what about you? And they didn't make much comments, so it's assumed that they will continue to supply the London gold market. So I asked the question, is London running dry of gold? I'm really looking forward, Kenneth, to the event where the COMEX no longer has their charade of gold sales on paper with no delivery of metal. Can you imagine buying television sets at a department store where they don't let you walk out with a television set?
Wow. Well,
Jim, walking into a Mercedes dealer and paying your money, and you cannot take the keys to the Mercedes, but they say that you can roll that over to the next year's model. It's an absolute farce what's going on. That's why I don't pay a lot of attention. I mean, in the last couple of years, honestly, Kenneth, if you picked a random day and said, Jim, what's the gold price? I'd say, you mean the COMEX corrupt paper gold price? You'd say yes. I'd say, well, I'm not really sure, but let me take a guess. I might be within $50 of what the posted price is. That's how irrelevant I think it is. I care much more about a $185 million gold sale in Hong Kong, where they actually deliver the metal, and I want to know what is the premium they paid over the corrupt paper gold price on the COMEX. That's what I care about.
Sure. Well, you talked about this net zero between the fiat currencies. One goes up, one goes down, and it's just this net zero effect. But we're all anticipating that purchasing power between the fiat currencies pouring into precious metals or some other hard asset. I mean, some are saying that it's even going into cryptocurrencies, some different form to the traditional controlled fiat system. And so what are your thoughts on that? Are we seeing some more jabs at the controlled system with cryptocurrency, adding another front of attack for the bankers controlling the precious metals price?
I think so. a lot of loose money is going into cryptocurrencies. Some people are perhaps selling a bit of their gold and silver, the precious metals, and buying cryptocurrencies. They're looking to see what is not restricted. They're looking to see what has a more fair, balanced price, where demand works against the supply, brings about an equilibrium, and a price moves, as opposed to the COMEX, where if there's much of a price move, suddenly there's a quarter of a year's global mine output for gold dumped on the market in an hour and a half with never any delivery. The absolute criminality and farcical aspect of the COMEX needs to be a bigger story in financial press. And it's not yet. It's just a minor story. As for the cryptos, hard to really get a really good analogy, but just think of it as a relief valve in the fiat currency system. If you looked at the true nature of activity at the Federal Reserve, for what they're really doing, they admit to buying, I don't know what it is lately. Are they admitting to buying $40 billion of U.S. Treasuries a month, or is it 70? I don't know, because they adapt their lies to the day and to the pressure from, critics who object to the fact that the United States is acting like Zimbabwe since 2012, doing unsterilized bond monetization. I'd like to define what that is so people understand it more clearly and understand that the United States is acting like Zimbabwe and not to expect a good outcome from this. In past years, if the Fed wanted to do a monetization program or a liquidity initiative, they were very careful not to make it unsterilized. They instead would make it sterilized, where they would draw funds from the banking system and add funds to their treasury purchases with a net zero effect in the banking system. That's called sterilized. And you won't find that word much in the press, nor will you find unsterilized much in the financial press, because it's a point of extraordinary embarrassment that we call stimulus hypermonetary inflation of an unsterilized type. We're just buying at the Fed probably well over half and probably 2/3 or more of the $1 trillion in U.S. government deficits annually. We're doing it in unsterilized manner. We're not draining the system of that amount in order to add that amount for the devoted purchase of treasury bonds. We're just doing hyper-monetary inflation like Zimbabwe does. Okay, so you have all this money sloshing around in the financial sector. What's also not told much is that they're covering a lot of ruined derivatives that are in the trillions. You cannot dismantle the petrodollar financial structure without liquidation and dismantling multi-trillion-dollar derivatives. 5 years. So the Fed admits, let's just call it $70 billion a month. That's $800 billion a year. Or let's call it $40 billion a month. That's $500 billion a year. They're lying. I think they're probably printing an extra $5 or $10 trillion a month to cover ruined and dismantling derivatives that threaten the whole system. They actually have a phrase for a derivative event. They call it a nuclear event. It's so devastating if it happens. It would close the banking system and probably result in a lot of lost bank accounts. And many people have asked me, well, where do these things come from? Well, remember Black Monday in 1987? Yeah,
the year I was born.
Okay, well, I was I was a young fellow in my young 30s at that time, mid 30s at my time. That was 4 years, 3 or 4 years after a very big event occurred in the United States economy. It was the beginning of the outsourced manufacturing trend. 1984 was when Intel announced that they were going to move their California chip fabrication plants to the Pacific Rim. I'm talking about Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore, etc. And I sat around with my friends at a computer manufacturing company where we were doing marketing research, and I was saying, my gosh, fast forward 10, 20 years, and this is going to be a disaster for the nation because it's legitimate income that's going to go away. And if this thing catches fire, and a lot of other things are manufactured in Asia, we later were told it was to be called low-cost solution. It's not a low-cost solution. It's legitimate income abandonment. Yeah. Okay, well, in 84, the trend began. In 87, there was a major hiccup called Black Monday. Most financial historians don't link it with the beginning of the outsourced U.S. industrial sector. I do. And then when we had the Mexican problem and more financial turmoil in 1993 and 4, that was just a second reverberation, I think, of the U.S. relying upon financial asset bubbles after having accelerated the abandonment and outsourcing of U.S. industry. So, fast forward again to 1999-2000, you had a much bigger hiccup. It's called the tech telecom crash. And I think that was the third phase for the crashing effect from U.S. industrial outsourcing. Then in 2006 and 7, we had all this excessive reliance again on financial bubbles, and the subprime bond market was blamed. Of course, that was the epicenter, but the major problem for the U.S. was lost manufacturing and undue reliance upon the financial engineering that Greenspan spoke of glowingly, but which blew up in our faces. So we have all these different financial problems that are relieved by more printing of money that in 2009 became at 0%, and 2012 became virtually unlimited hidden bond monetization and hypermonetary inflation of the unsterilized type. So now we have a new phenomenon. It's like a relief valve. It started out slowly in 2011 and 12 and 13, and it's been picking up a lot of speed lately and momentum. As you see, what is it? Every 6 or 8 months, Bitcoin doubles in value. Now, if you don't think that's a bubble, I think you're mistaken. I think it's a bubble, but it's a bubble that's hanging off the elephant's ass at the Fed.
You went on to...
until the Fed restrains itself. I don't think they will.
Sure. Jim, you compared basically the way our government is acting to other, and I'll steal Trump's words on this, other shithole countries. And it's amazing that the U.S. has gotten away with this for so many years. And I guess the question is, how long can this go for? And it's really an open-ended question. But did you want to touch on that, or could we move on to artificial intelligence? You kind of did.
The U.S. doesn't get away with anything. They bring about crashes. They bring about broken foreign economies. They bring about wars to defend the dollar. They come up with false cause of wars like in Afghanistan and Iraq. We don't get away with anything. There are effects that are felt. and most of the effects are felt outside the U.S. borders. So if you want to say that the U.S. gets away with it by continuing within the U.S. borders, I would even object to that, because we have a gutting of the United States. We have severe neglect of the U.S. infrastructures, bridge, highways, port facilities, etc. And we have massive unemployment that's over 20%, probably around 24%. I believe 24% is what Shadow Government Statistics is citing. And until the oil price came down 2 years ago, we were seeing annual 8 to 9% price inflation. So we're not getting away with anything. We cause wars, we cause breakdowns, just for instance, in the Dominican Republic, which is home to a couple friends of mine here in Costa Rica, they had a 40% or 35% currency decline from 2013 to 2016. Okay, they didn't get away with anything. All their food prices went up, like 50%, 40%.
Sure, good point.
I mean, we had to do a war in Ukraine to defend the dollar and prevent Russian gas supply from becoming more important in Europe than it already was. We had to do a war in Iraq because we needed to steal their gold and stop them from selling oil in euro terms. We don't advertise why we do these wars in honest terms. We just do a war, claim that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, go in there, proclaim that we never found any, which is another lie. In 2009, I met a fellow here who was going to do some marketing work for me for the newsletter, and I said, well, hey, Dan, what did you do in the last few years? And he said, well, in 2003, 4, and 5, I was working for Halliburton, where we found 10 warehouses of chemical weapons.
Okay.
And they all had made in USA markings on them. So did we find any weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? Okay, we had a war there. The real motive for that war was twofold: stop their sale of oil in euros and to steal their central bank gold. We even lied about that. We came up with a total horseshit story about finding a cave full of yellow wooden bricks, yellow wooden blocks. No, I got pictures right now. I'm going to put it in my January hat-trick letter of 4 truckloads of stolen Iraq central bank gold with U.S. soldiers just kind of gloating over them. Okay, we don't get away with anything. We've had to rely on financial bubbles and busts. How's that working out? Did we even get past the '87 Black Monday? Did we even get past the tech telecom bust of 2000? Did we even get past the 2007 Lehman kill? That wasn't a Lehman failure, Kenneth. That was a Lehman strangulation. They sold a few $1 billion worth of mortgage bonds to Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, and those firms never paid for them. That was strangulation.
Sure. No,
we haven't gotten past bond monetization, especially unsterilized, that's an admission of failure also. We haven't gotten away with anything. We've just wrecked our country.
Sure. All right, Jim. Well, point well taken. And it's definitely from that perspective, the U.S. is not getting away with anything. So let's talk about a game changer, though, and that is artificial intelligence. Despite all of the economic problems, technology is moving along and rapidly changing. We have robots that are now thinking on their own and not just being programmed, but able to learn. And that is a game changer. And the implications of artificial technology are something people are very worried about, some of which include Elon Musk. We got Stephen Hawking, who's expressing their concerns about the potential of artificial technology. Of course, a lot of their solutions are things like universal income, like perpetual poverty, right? And just extreme communism. But anyways, just some thoughts as to where you think artificial technology is headed and the implications on the economy.
pardon me. In November, December, I actually had a couple of stories in my hat trick letter about the effect of robot employees, and the biggest element of its growth in industry is with Amazon. They have something like 30 to 40% of all the increases in hires. Robots. Amazon is a very successful company, and I like to point out that their work in the cloud storage area is subsidized by Langley. Langley gives them a contract. It's very lucrative, and with that they can subsidize their cost, reduce their cost under the competitors. So, but that's just one side of the robot story. You may not regard it as a robot, but it's certainly automation. About 15 years ago, we started to see much more widespread basis the usage of automatic gasoline pump attendants, or if you will, just automatic pumps, where you could swipe your own credit card and designate that you wanted $15 worth of gasoline, and it would stop at 15. It was very well managed. I never experienced a single problem with either the amount of flow of gasoline or the dollar charge against my credit card. Okay, that was very nice, but it put out of work gas station attendants who were, pretty much bored standing there while the tank got filled up and the hand was, holding the lever on the pump. Okay, but there are more and more different roles being played by robots, and I think a good share of it is in warehouse quality control, warehouse management, inventory control. In other words, run down that aisle and see what needs to be restocked, see what's out of stock, capture the bar number, barcodes, and produce a report, print it out, send it to the manager. That's being done more and more by robot technology. And that's all well and good. We always had the argument 2 decades ago that if we automate things, it would create more jobs at the management level. Okay, I always ask the question, when the robot finishes its job, where does it send the report? Does it send it to a human? Usually yes. A site manager? Usually yes. A foreman or whatever in charge of a warehouse? Yes. Okay, so there are more jobs for the warehouse foreman, but they're not growing at anything like the amount of jobs that are being forfeited by humans. And here's a new phenomenon in the U.S. economy that is very unrecognized, unpublicized, and horrendously embarrassing. I've had numerous clients send me stories from their own experience in their own small company, or they know someone who has this experience. Job openings are announced in the United States, and over half the applicants cannot work full-time because they've got drug problems, and close to half also have physical problems. Like they can't concentrate, or they have an arm that's not working very well. And a third element is people who are on government subsistence, like food stamps. So you've got debilitated people, drug addicts, and essentially food stamp collectors dominating the job application window. And these employers are saying, I can't operate like that. I need able-bodied people who can work and concentrate and show up to work the next day.
Robots.
So they're hiring more foreigners. What I'm trying to say is the United States workforce, the part that's not really employed, they're not very employable. Okay, so there's a good opportunity for the robots. Now let's move on to military. in the last 10 years, we're seeing a lot more drone technology, recon, and starting about 5 years ago, bomb dropping. Other drones would paint the targets with laser so that a second party, whether it's a drone or a small missile, can hit the target. Okay, this is pretty sad because the error rate is unfortunate and the civilian kills are extremely high, and we rationalize it away. The Iranians, interestingly, about 2 years ago, intercepted a rogue drone. By that I mean a drone that was wandering in the Iranian airspace, which is, perfectly improper. And they forced it to land so they could study it. So they hacked it, landed it, and studied it. There are lots of reasons the United States doesn't like Iran. They don't sell their oil and gas in dollars, and they bring down the drones. And, it's just a whole long story, but I found it interesting that a year ago, the Obama administration worked very hard with the UN Security Council, 4 nations plus Germany. They call it the UN Security Council SC plus 1, Germany. That those 5 countries and other groups, another group of countries that sat in on the conferences and treaty agreements, they came up with a treaty, and the United States immediately in 2017 abrogated the treaty and continued to call Iran a terrorist state. Or should I say Israel continued to call it a terrorist state, and the United States said, whatever you say. The drones are a problem because there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of ethics behind their usage. There's no board for drone bombing, for instance, to see was that a legitimate target? Were there civilians killed? Will there be civilian compensation for wrongful death? No, there's no board like that. It's just U.S. does whatever the hell it wants. Where my fear factor enters, Kenneth, is with drones working with robot cops, police. You start to see it more and more in the movie industry. There was a great movie called Elysium with an orbiting community. It was a little hokey how they managed to hold on to an atmosphere, but let's not bother with that. Matt Damon was the hero, and he got whacked a couple times and injured, a leg injury, by a police robot who warned him that his bad attitude was going to earn him more demerits. And but I think it did mean a docked amount from his paycheck. Okay, we do see integrating into our psyches robot cops, police, and I don't think there's going to be much control over violence, brutality, and accidents. I'll give you an example. A news reporter might reveal some military fraud or failed weapons system that continues to be funded, heavily funded. And 2 robot cops pay him a visit, and one of them goes haywire and kills the reporter. And the police say, well, just a malfunction. A malfunction among police, who are humans, results in reprimands, suspensions, kicking off the person from the police force, compensation to the people, and possibly criminal charges. What do you do? We don't even have the rules set up for police that are robots. I mean, this could get very gnarly. I'm very leery of the robot element. I like to see it happen slowly. I mean, you even have stories of flying robot drones delivering Amazon products.
Sure.
Well, what happens if that drone hits a helicopter and forces a crash. Is there liability for that to Amazon? Or perhaps was the helicopter including a news reporter who did a controversial story? This gets very much out of control quickly. I've got a colleague on my Jackass team, and he's been making the point for the last 2 years. He brings it up every few months. He said, Jim, these robots, these drones used by the military, they might get hacked and might be redirected to hit the Pentagon. It's just a matter of time. But these things can be hacked. And the United States doesn't have a monopoly on hacking analysis and expertise at Langley. There's plenty of foreign expertise. So I think there's therefore vulnerability to foreign elements hacking our drones. We made a very big decision 2 years ago to kill civilians with drone hits, and that was acceptable. We call it acceptable collateral damage if the target, like a mass terrorist and arms dealer involved in explosives in London and Rome or whatever. If we killed him, it's okay to kill 7 in his family and 4 of his friends by taking out 4 houses at once. We don't have precision hits with these drones. They're impressive, but we made a decision, and there was even a movie. I saw it 2 years ago. I was shocked. It was a movie about a Nevada center, Ethan Hawke, the actor. He's been around with dozens of movies. He was a retired Air Force pilot who was now commanding a console to do drone hits in Afghanistan of known and suspected targets. And during the movie, they changed the priority to hit the civilian and kill civilians. The acceptable civilian collateral damage rule came in. And the person giving all the orders was someone out of Langley. So Langley was in command of a U.S. Air Force Central Drone Control Center. So I asked, who's in charge of the Pentagon? These are very tough ethical questions, Kenneth, and I don't have a lot of answers, but when I was in graduate school, AI was a hot topic. And back then, the big issues were declaration of rules and the ability to learn, as you pointed out. And I would like to understand more about how robots are enduring the learning curve, because that's amazing. What that means is you could send a drone into, say, a damaged nuclear center and have the drone not just collect data, but figure out what the problem is.
Right.
And the way they do things like that is they would come up, a robot would come up with a list of 5 potential explanations for the raft of symptoms that are diagnosed and logged. And it might say we have a 72% chance that it is this, A, a 22% that is B, and C, D, and E bring out the small numbers to make them add up to close to 100, and then unknown might be 1%, who knows. Okay, that's how robots might work with making conclusions. And the conclusions are from learning. The conclusions can be from not necessarily learning. It can be just, what could explain this? What factors would result in similar outcomes like what we're diagnosing? But then it could go one step further and say things like, we suspect X, Y, and Z, and it would be worth examining X, Y, and Z because here is how they bear on the components that we just measured. Okay, this is fascinating stuff. I tried to take a computer science course, I'll be honest, on this topic. It was a simulation course, and I cannot remember the name of the simulation language. I can't remember it because it was 1974, and it's a long time ago. Simula, I can't remember. Anyway, it was for the programming side of it was different initiations. Like, okay, you start this process at this time, you start another process at another time, like 11 hours later, and according to a calendar, you start other processes, and you have all these rule-based systems at work, and then you have a network and maze for a flow, like for instance, an assembly line for manufacturing. Right. And the whole purpose was, how'd this all work out? Did we set up the manufacturing assembly line well? What was the output like? What were the accident rates? You know, things like that. This fascinating stuff, but we've gone several levels farther since my very basic primitive exposure to AI in the '70 decade. We're now getting into drone technology, drone kills, laser painting, drones that go over for recon and try to do pattern recognition, like, for instance, look for an artillery plant, or artillery base, look for nuclear weapons, things like that. Pattern recognition is just a nice way of saying, elevated phrase for detection of whatever it is that you program into it. It's fascinating. It really is. But what I've noticed in the last, I don't know, maybe half of my life, 30 years, is that most of the high tech in the United States gets put to military use.
You know what? It is crazy the way things are changing, especially with artificial intelligence. And I think you talked a lot about robotics and physical robots, like a drone or an actual robot. But this goes, as I'm sure you know, goes far beyond that. Just what's going on in the internet and just things, software and protocols, understanding and predicting, what humans might do. And it's unbelievable. And it sounds conspiratorial because I think it's so far beyond, or I guess the technology is so revolutionary, but that's just it. The technology is so revolutionary. I mean, there are some blockchain technologies that they're talking about where it has all your information on it. And if you walk into a dentist's office, for instance, it'll recognize where you're at and ask you, how much information do you want to upload to their system so they have your medical records, your name, your social security number, all this identifying information right on the blockchain. And it's mind-blowing. And you don't know what the consequences of this will be down the road. But I guess with that, Jim, if you'd like to share some closing thoughts here, we had a great discussion. We're going on roughly the 40-minute mark. I appreciate your time here with Crush the Street, but some closing thoughts that you would have for the audience.
Watch the petrodollar. That's key right now for preserving the dollar as a global reserve currency. The biggest privilege and abuse within the United States economy and financial system is our ability to print money and retain all the global banking systems in treasury bond form. The Chinese are trying to buy Saudi and Gulf Arab oil now in RMB terms, their own currency. Iran, Russia, and China are setting up a rather extensive system now for energy sales outside the dollar. I think it's going to be the foundation of the Eurasian trade zone. It's going to extend far beyond energy sales. So watch the Shanghai pair of futures contracts. They're gold for oil and they're RMB for oil contracts. That creates an RMB oil gold triangle that could be used as a foundation for a lot of different other instruments, like, say, a gold trade note that I believe is coming and will be built upon that triangle. The gold trade note could actually supplant and push aside the treasury bill for oil payment in the entire Eastern Hemisphere. Okay, that's a very big area. This petrodollar now giving way to oil sales in RMB. Uh, if the United States suffers damage from this new trend, the United States will eventually have to issue a domestic dollar with unbelievably damaging consequences, like devaluations, price inflation, and civil disorder. Lots of shortages.
Right.
Okay, so I suggest that people follow the non-dollar platforms that you don't read much about in the Western press because they don't want you to know about them.
Well, Jim, I appreciate your time in coming on Crush the Street. If people want to learn more about you, I suggest everyone visit the goldenjackass.com and read Jim's work at the Hat Trick Letter. Jim, thanks for coming on Crush the Street.
It's a pleasure being on. I hope people go to goldenjackass.com because many of these topics that I bring up as important, many of them are not given much proper time in the Western press. And that's why I do give them time, because they're very important. When we do have shock waves that hit the United States, we're going to get a lot of lies as to why the shocks occurred, because the people are not going to be able to say, well, isn't that just a consequence of the lost petrodollar? Isn't that a consequence of the global currency reserve no longer being part and parcel of the U.S. dollar? And, you know, when I talk to Americans, most of them don't even know what the global currency reserve is. Because they've been badly educated and they tend to read the New York Times too much.
Right.
But this might change slowly this year. There are a number of Eastern syndicated press networks that are making solid inroads in the West and are talking about topics that are taboo in our side of the world. So these are the things that I focus on. I focus on the U.S. economy, U.S. banking, U.S. currency, but I also focus on the Eurasian trade zone emerging. I focus on the European system that is slowly rejecting the U.S. influence, and I focus rather seriously on the petrodollar and the Arab monarchies, all of which I think are going to collapse.
All right, Jim. Well, hey, thanks for coming on Crush the Street. I suggest everyone go visit his work. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, it's a pleasure being on. Thanks for having me.